Scripture lesson this morning comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 12, beginning with the 38th verse. Then some of the religious scholars and Pharisees spoke up. "Teacher, we want to see a miraculous sign from you." Jesus answered, "It is an evil and unfaithful generation that asks for a sign. The only sign to be given is the sign of Jonah the prophet. For as Jonah was in the whale's belly for 3 days and 3 nights, so will the chosen one be 3 days and 3 nights in the bowels of the earth. On Judgment Day, the citizens of Nineveh will stand up against this generation and condemn it because they repented when Jonah preached. But now one greater than Jonah is here. On Judgment Day, the Queen of Sheba will rise up against this generation and condemn it, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear Solomon. But now one greater than Solomon is here. When an unclean spirit goes out of a person, it wanders through in places and searching for rest. When it finds none, it says, 'I will return to the home I left.' And upon returning, it finds its old house empty and swept clean. Then it goes and brings back 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and set up housekeeping. The person ends up far worse than before, and that is how it will be with evil generation." Ancient words from our tradition for our present day consideration.
Somebody move my solid gold lectern. It's upside down. Okay. Welcome. Thanks everybody for being here. Well, today we're going to be looking at a very strange story, one that you've probably heard over the years, but it's one of those things about the Christian story. A lot of times people just pretend like it's not happening. You know, you're hearing a story like this, and it's not something you believe anyway, but you think you're supposed to. So you just kind of go on autopilot and kind of, you know, let the preacher say whatever it is that the preacher's going to say. You know how preachers are. But today we're going to look at the story a little differently, a lot differently, I think. First slide is somebody had a very big effect on me when I was younger, because I was pretty sure my Sunday school teachers didn't know what they were talking about. I had some really good ones too, but in general, my impression was that pretty much most of the church is bluffing. They've been told a story about the past, and they have no idea whether it's true or not, but they're going to pretend like it because that's what you're supposed to do. And you're supposed to come every week and say the creed, even if it doesn't make any sense. I'll never forget one of the first Sundays I was preaching, there was a typo in the bulletin where it said, instead of "my rock and my redeemer," it said "Mr. Rock and my redeemer," or something like that. And the congregation just with a straight face, "Mr. Rock," I thought, okay, this is not good. Religion should awaken us, right? It shouldn't put us in a trance. And I very much believe that the early church was trying to do that. It's trying to make people wiser, kinder. So we're going to try to get back to maybe that understanding and see what you think. But Thomas Merton, I ran across him. I was kind of desperate, and I tried to get God to give me a sign, and it wasn't working out. I mean, things would happen, but I never knew whether it was me talking to myself or what. And you have a story like this where good religious people were going to Jesus and saying, please just give us a sign. Because I think almost everybody at some point said, just do something, make a horse float by, and I'll never bother you again, right? Just do something. My thing was to hold the rock and say, if you'll just hold it in the air for a minute, I'm good. I'm on the team. You don't ever have to worry again. You'd be surprised how that worked out for me. So in the story of this whale, Jonah is swallowed by the whale, stays in the belly for 3 days, and then Jesus says, just like that, the human one is going to be in the belly of the earth, and that's supposed to somehow make sense, right? At least we pretend that it does. Like, what does a whale have to do with the resurrection? I don't get it. But with Thomas Merton had this symbol very important in his life. He wrote a book called The Sign of Jonah. He was the first mystic I ever ran across, which I really liked that. It was less about praying, more about meditating. It's less about talking to God and more getting still and just kind of listening and trying to find a quiet place. I really liked that. I loved that he studied other religions. He went all over the world and learned from people in the East and brought that back. And that was incredibly exciting to me. What I didn't like was his compassion and contemplation grew into social justice. Now, I wasn't really interested in that. Now, I wanted enlightenment, and the plight of the world was kind of a buzz killer. You know what I mean? I wanted my ego to get smarter, wiser, more compassionate, but not compassionate like helping other people, more like compassion, like I feel sorry for them. Right? But justice had nothing, I saw that as not being spiritual. And when I got into the church, there were a lot of people that agreed with that until my compassion, my mysticism began to grow. And, I started saying, okay, this boat didn't go where I wanted it to go. Well, that's kind of what this story is about. Jonah, I think, represents our immature ego, the place that we start off in the journey. And so we're going to look, next is, I hope, Sign of Jonah with a cave in the background, because we have this story of the whale or the fish or whatever it was, Jonah swallowed by that, held in tension with the resurrection of Jesus. Those may seem like really different, but I think the scripture is trying to say that there's one myth that weaves those together. Now, when I say myth, what I mean are personal stories that illumine life. It's not that they're untrue. They're stories that go deep inside our awareness. See, the stuff we can talk about, the conscious part of our being, is just at the surface. There's a depth inside of us that you can't talk about. And one of the reasons that led me into religion is that these myths, they're parables, they're poems that take you deep within your own consciousness. And that's sort of the setting I'd like for us to think about today. The question isn't whether there was really a whale that swallowed somebody. But what is this symbol trying to teach us about our own lives? Let me read a definition of myth that I like. And before I read this, it's really important to realize that Jonah is a comedy. When you hear the story of Jonah, you're supposed to laugh. Right? I mean, churches don't do that. They think, get really serious and things like that. But it's a stupid story. And the reason it's a stupid story is because our own ego does some really dumb things when our spiritual calling takes us some places we don't want to go. That's, I think, what the story is about. But this is D.H. Lawrence talking about myth. He says, myth is an attempt to narrate a whole human experience of which the purpose is too deep, going too deep in the blood and the soul for mental explanation or description. I'm hoping that's clear, that religion and mythology are a kind of vocabulary that take you into the cave of your own heart, further than your brain can go, to where you can feel the depths out of which you come, where you can feel the interconnectedness you have with all of life and all of being. So that's kind of the context. When I say myth, I'm talking about a sacred poem that gives a very simple story that teaches a very profound lesson. So in this story, God goes, and remember, this is a parable. You don't have to worry about the details. God goes to Jonah and says, I want you to go to Nineveh, which is the enemy of your people, and I want you to preach to them so I won't have to destroy them. Because the anger of God was not because people smoked or got tattoos. It was against empire. It was against the exploitation of other people. If you'll look back, that's kind of the theme, that it's an anti-bullying message. So God goes to Jonah and says, I want you to go to these people that you hate, and I want you to preach a message to them. And if they have a change of heart, I won't have to kill them. Now, Jonah, representing our ego, says, oh, this is just great. You want me to go and talk to these creeps? And I know you. I know you're so nice, you're going to let them off the hook. But they deserve punishment. That's what I want to do. I want to go to them and make them feel really bad. And then I want the sky to open up and I want flames and things. I mean, I'm a prophet. I'm a prophet. And he turns into be the biggest whiny crybaby in the world. He's throwing a tissy fit the whole time in the story. And I think there are actually three signs of Jonah that are here. The first is that he's saying no to his calling. And what that does is it puts him, it feels like he's rowing upstream the whole time. He gets on a boat out of town. Back then, they didn't have Uber. So he gets on a boat and he says, let's go someplace besides where, I have to save Nineveh. And all of a sudden, storms are everywhere. The first symbol is when you're saying no to your calling as a human being. I'm not talking just about religion. I'm talking about your calling to be fully human, fully alive, to be fully who you are. When you say no to that calling, it will seem like life is against you. And you'll be making the same, you won't think they're mistakes. You're making the same mistakes, but you think the same bad things are happening to you over and over again. You think the deck is stacked. The psychology, I found out this week, there is a diagnosis called the Jonah complex. And it's when you say no to the best parts of yourself. When you decide you're going to hunker down in a crummy job, a crummy life, and just pretend to be happy. That the first sign that you're going the wrong direction is that life is going to be in your face all the time. Because what's happening is you're saying no to this new life that's being born in you. You're trying not to be your great self. You're trying not to be as large as you possibly can be. Because that's really what salvation, enlightenment, all that stuff is about, going beyond your personal self to feeling your larger self, the connection with everything. Again, for me, I didn't want to go there because I wanted the buzz of having my ego be smart. Having people come to my office and I would listen, well, my child. And what a bummer to realize that's not helping anybody. Right? That doesn't help for me to be smart doesn't help anybody. What people are looking for is their own wisdom. So in this story, he's trying to go away from his calling, and they keep hitting storms. So he says to the people on the boat, well, just throw me overboard. Now, is that passive aggressive or what? He doesn't just jump out of the boat. He says, well, I guess you have to, being a martyr that I am, just throw me overboard and y'all go on and have a good time because I'll just stay here bobbing in the waves until the fish get me. So again, what's being talked about is when we say no to our calling in life, it seems to us that life is out to get us. And that is a sign, that's a symbol. When Jesus said, when he's talking about evil generation, he's talking about bad religion. When you want miracles all the time, when nature's not good enough for you, you need magic. You're not listening to your own life because there's lots of important, wise stuff happening in the midst of our problems. So I think the first sign is when you go against your life's calling, it's going to feel really bad. And the second thing, I think, is when you're swallowed by the fish. And this is also a kind of universal symbol. You see it all over the world. Could we see? Yes, this is such a wonderful thing. He gets swallowed by the fish. Am I in the way? Swallowed by the fish, whale, whatever. And he feels like he's being dissolved. That's what the symbol is talking about. It's like you feel like life is eating you or something is devouring you. And what's really happening in this mythology, the symbol system, is you're holding on to something in the past and you're saying no to something new. In this story, I just love this part of his story. He's looking on Nineveh. He wants Nineveh to be destroyed. That little tree is a shade. Is that pathetic or what? This little bitty plant, he's trying to find shade under the thing. And then in the story, the mythology, again, you don't have to worry about the details, but God sends a worm to kill the tree, to make the tree wither. So now he's praying to die, right? It's just so unjust. He had his little plant that was shading him from, and it's just the way the ego, gets into being the star of the story, even if you have to choose an unhappy story to make that take place. So the first thing is going in the wrong direction. It feels like life is against you. The second thing is that personal growth or enlightenment or salvation or whatever you want to call this growth is not about personal transformation alone. It's also about awakening to the whole world as your greater self. And I think this is lost in most teachings, but you're a small person, but you're also a great part of the whole world. You're a cell in the common body of life. You are a force of nature. Right? Maybe your personal story doesn't always seem like that, but you are a manifestation of whatever the cosmos is. So to realize that the calling is not to just improving your little self, but to awakening to your great self is really, I think that's very important. But when we say no to the great self, it feels like life is eating us. We feel like we're being devoured. And it's kind of like an aspirin. An aspirin has to dissolve to do what it was meant to do, right? So the ego dissolves. The ego is your vessel. But you're much greater than that. And the fact that you're going to die tells you just don't sit on your chips, right? You play the game and give yourself fully and completely to it. So the fish is one symbol of it. The cave is a symbol of it. The crucifix is a symbol of it. But it's all that idea of the ego being transformed into this vessel for the whole world. This is how Thomas Merton talked about it. Let's see. Thomas Merton felt that you could, by going internally, you could work on the whole world. He said it like this: instead of hating the people you think are war makers, hate the appetites and disorders in your own soul, which are the causes of war. If you love peace, then hate injustice, hate tyranny, hate greed, but hate these things in yourself, not in another. I think what he's saying is when you change your own heart, you change the world. To never think that you're helpless. That when you work on your own bitterness, hatred, greed, all of those things, you're giving a gift to the world. And you're also getting out of the alligator's jaws. The last symbol, I think, the last sign of Jonah is the hardest to talk about because in Hebrew, everything is very guttural. You know, it's very embodied. So you have number one and number two. You never talk about that in a sermon. And if you don't know what number one and number two is, ask on the way out. But in this story, you have, the Bible tries to be so delicate, but in the original story, this fish vomits. That's fish puke. And what it's saying is that when you've gone through this process of transformation, you'll be spit out into the place you need to be. And it's not saying that there's some kind of magical thing happening. It's saying wherever you are, you can do the work. If your awareness is right. If you've let go of your small self, you'll awaken to where you need to be in the world. In the Tibetan Buddhism, they have a thing about kind of a lesson on from the cow's horn. When a bull or a cow grows a horn, at the beginning, it must be very painful. It's not a weapon at all. It's just clumsy. It's painful. They say it has little hairs in it. I've never gotten that close. I never will get that close. But that's a wonderful parable to realize that your greatest strength may feel like a weakness when it first starts coming out. And you have to trust in what is happening to you and through you. As a religious person in the United States of America, you've probably been taught religion as throw up. Right? We give you stuff, you throw it back up again. Right? You come, you say the creeds, we can actually do better than that. Right? When you enter new life, there's nothing repetitious about it. But when we enter a new life, it's like we're clumsy. We don't know the language. So I don't even know where I am on the pictures. Give me another one. Okay, that's the fish throw up. I wanted to give you a gift of, and the next, that's the thing of the transformation that's taking place inside the fish. And this is the last of them. Because we're asking, what does it mean, the sign of Jonah, or just signs in general? How does the sacred make itself known to guide us? Kind of thing. When we can let go of the past and be born into the present moment, it's very awkward and it's very clumsy, but it's thrilling, and life is an adventure. And the way you know you're there is because of the freshness of it and the discomfort, right? But your horizon is going to get bigger. Your heart's going to get deeper. And that's really all the evidence you have that you're on the right path. But you have to grow into this larger self, or you're going to wind up back in the same fish again. I think this is what this is saying. When they tell the story of the demons, the demon is cast out and it goes out in the world, comes back, the person's just the same. It's still an ego. It's now a very religious ego. But that's the worst place you can be. Look at the United States. Look what religion is doing. Where instead of transcending the small self, you make the small self omniscient. Right? You claim to speak for God and you try to control everything. So that religion needs to die. But what's born out of us is something fresh and new. If there were demons, I don't believe in demons, but demons are a symbol of the unknown parts of ourselves. And they haunt us and they come back and they undermine us until we transform them. So I believe this story is told in comedic form. It's a poem, it's a parable, it's mythology. And what it's saying is what you think may be your worst problems are actually signs, illuminations of the way. If it seems like life is against you and the same bad things keep happening over and over again, consider whether or not you're fleeing your calling. Just a suggestion. And then second, if it feels like you've been swallowed and you're being devoured and you're being eaten alive, consider that it's time to let go of something from the past and take up the new. And finally, if you feel like completely clumsy and you feel like you don't know how to say what you feel inside, you can't express it, you feel it, but you can't express it. Well, that's what the new life feels like. Clumsy, awkward, exciting, and alive. When Merton wanted to summarize the life of contemplation that leads, love grows into justice, he said, to enter into the realm of contemplation, one must, in a certain sense, die. But this death is, in fact, the entrance to a higher life. It is the death for the sake of life, which leaves behind all we can know or treasure as life, as thought, as experience, as joy, as being. Every form of intuition and experience. We die to be born again on a higher level of life. So if you've been running from who you are, you might just consider a change in course and to realize what you will discover is that you are not some frightened, tiny individual lost at sea. You are a force of nature waiting to be manifest. Well, that's the best I can do with this passage. So that's why we always take a minute afterwards for you to think of how you would understand these words. So we take a moment now for your own reflection on this ancient story.